Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This episode is very important because we're going to discuss about Ukraine and Russia war. This is very important. Last week, Professor Dr. Talib Rafael actually bring this important point. We need global peace. We need peace in Europe. We need peace in Africa. We need peace in Middle East and Asia everywhere. World Talent Economy Forum always focus on global peace. We focus on human developments. So we will discuss on that particular points with our world famous speakers. We have our famous speakers, Professor Fred Philip, Madam Lien, Professor David Wood, very famous in World Talent Economy Forum, Professor Dr. Talib Rafael, he is our honorary board of advisors, as well as our famous speaker, Professor David Smith also joined with us. First, I want to give chance Professor Fred Philip.
Well, thank you very much, Sharif. Um, really pleased that we have a number of Tondo Fellows on the panel today. Lynn Schneider, David Smith, that's a surprise. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
And Mr. Paul Joyal is trying to log in, and I hope he can join us soon. And thank you to Mr. Wood and Mr. Rupal for joining us also. Hey, what's going on in Ukraine? The shooting war is a horrible, horrible thing, and the economic war is imposing hardships on Russians that they really don't deserve. But here we are talking about the information war, so to speak. Who is sending what kinds of signals to whom, and who is succeeding at that? So there are three aspects of the information war that I see. One is the social media activity. Second, of course, is the cyber warfare. And third is the world leaders' exchange of signals, verbal signals, action signals, the kinds that the game theorists deal with. So one Washington Post column claims that Putin is winning the information war by controlling the Russian news media, by shutting down apps that carry independent news, and by persuading China to do much of the same regarding the Ukraine war news. Yet the Russians are finding ways to acquire virtual private networks, VPNs. They're getting news from YouTube. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who of course is media savvy, he's pursuing a multi-channel strategy to ensure that his very touching address to the Russian people is seen by them. Another Washington Post article, you can see where I get my news, reports that YouTube has blocked Russian government propaganda channels. And I was surprised to learn that there are a great many of those channels. So it's an open question whether Apple and Google should, whether Apple and Google should join the sanctions and boycott Russia, or stay and be a channel for ordinary Russians to get true news. Yet the power of these technology companies to shape geopolitics presents problems of its own, which we'll have to deal with later. Ukraine President Zelensky is a former comic and a former actor, and as such, he is a very skilled communicator. I'm sure he still has a lot to learn about administering a country in peacetime, but these outstanding communication skills serve Ukraine most admirably in this battle of words and images. So though Putin has things under control in Russia and maybe will continue to do so in China, the rest of the world is rallying in the infosphere in ways Putin did not anticipate. So the social media battle and the vigorous worldwide governmental and non-governmental cyber attacks on Russian assets show that war has now fundamentally changed. I hope, but I don't realistically expect that Putin's war will be the last war ever to be fought with guns and bombs, rather than with computers. But Putin's actions are showing an old-fashioned mindset. So, in short, Russia's disinformation and influence buying campaigns that they've carefully nurtured for decades blew apart when the first tanks rolled into Ukraine. Blew apart everywhere except Russia and China. One of its few persisting successes outside Russia and China has been to create a bitter Democrat-Republican argument in the United States about whether Donald Trump's poor treatment of Zelensky led Putin to believe that the West would not respond vigorously to an invasion of Ukraine. Now, what about the verbal signaling amongst the principals and other interested parties? Mr. Joyle quoted a poll in Russia that said 70% of Russians support Putin. I used to be in the polling business. When we asked people how much beer they consumed, most respondents would either lie or be unable to remember. So likewise, when the government pollster knocks on Russians' doors and asks whether the occupants support Putin, how many do you think are going to reply honestly? There's a former congressman in the United States. Now he's a TV host. His name is Joe Scarborough. And he tells us correctly that as the weaker of the major powers, Russia's strategy has always been to disrupt the status quo, while America and the West have tried conservatively to preserve the stable post-World War II international order. Certainly, Putin said he would not invade, then he did invade. He continually moves the bar for what he'd consider a Western act of war. First, if Ukraine were to join NATO, then if there were to be peacekeeping troops in Western Ukraine, then if Polish jets moved across the border, and then if the West sent defensive weapons to Ukraine. So yes, this is an ever-changing, disruptive way of acting. And he would, of course, also threaten to use nuclear weapons. Scarborough's wrong, though, to urge the West to match disruption for disruption. You should never play the other guy's game when the other guy is clearly more experienced and skilled at it than you are. President Biden has correctly played America's game, renewing America's traditional strength in alliance building, bringing back the close relationship with NATO allies that Trump had weakened. I do like Scarborough's recommendation that Joe Biden should stop saying what he will not do, for example, no-fly zone, and start saying what he will do. And most game theorists would agree that Biden should not have called Putin a war criminal, even though he is one, and even though Biden emphasized it was only his personal opinion. And this is because, as Scarborough has noted, and I quote, "If Putin believes his future is inside a cage at The Hague, he will have no incentive to end this war. I think a better signal to send would be that if Putin does not withdraw to Sweden, that Finland and Sweden will join NATO. That would be a better signal to send." Okay, to wrap up, what we've learned from American anti-vaxxers and others, beliefs are immune to facts. So just as there are hardcore Trump supporters in America, there are dedicated Putin supporters in Russia. Though these must number fewer than the mentioned 70%. And the Kremlin knows that the internet and social media can suck people farther and farther from reality. The Washington Post reports that the Kremlin is responsible for much of the online content that has drawn Americans to climate change denial and QAnon and so forth. So Putin will lose the immediate information war, but its effects will be sadly long-lasting in America and elsewhere. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor Fred Philip. As this issue is political, so we have our world famous politicians, Professor Dr. Talib Raphael. He actually played a lot of role in United Nations and ILO. Even he worked as a minister for Jordan. Dr. Talib Rafael, what you want to add? Even previous week, you add very important point for global peace. So, what you want to add for today's discussion, Dr. Talib?
Thank you.
Dr. Talib, can you hear me? I think he has internet problem. In that situation, I want to give chance Professor Dr. Leon Snyder. So what you want to add for today's discussion? After you, I will give chance to Dr. Talib.
I'm going to try to share a slide. I just want to say a couple of things. The problems with Ukraine and Russia and all of the NATO environment goes a long way back. So I don't want to point fingers at any particular president because they all are probably guilty. I have a personal interest in the Ukraine. My grandfather was born in Odessa, and the whole family came over here. His mom and dad and sister and cousins. A few of them got turned back and were murdered by Stalin, but by starvation. But they all came with a suitcase. So I'm looking at these pictures and going, "Wow, this is just like it was when the family fled Odessa." So I want to talk about the information warfare piece. I'm involved in a lot of different aspects of both the Ukraine and also with Afghanistan, which is another information warfare problem. But I want to show you this slide. I've been following several different groups. If I can share it here. Oh, it's not letting me. Sorry, I apologize for that.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, the slide I want to show you is the one I'm showing right now, but I don't think it's going to let me do it.
Even you can send me email. So
I sent it to Fred.
Okay.
But if you can't show it, I won't be able to show it either.
Okay.
There's no restrictions on people sharing. It seems to be enabled. Just a matter of sharing the right app, I think.
Yes.
Fred, send it to me and I can put it up in his online share there.
Okay. Do you see a share icon at the very bottom of your screen?
Yeah, I do.
It doesn't work?
It gives me options. I apologize for this. You're probably going to have to flip this all out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go back to it after.
It's really important, though, to show this slide. Why don't somebody else talk, and I will work on uploading the slide.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Talib, what you want to add for global peace?
I want to add something very important. My voice is okay? Am I heard okay?
Yes.
Good. It's a perspective of the developing world. It's different from that of the European and American world. In the developing world, especially our part of the world, they don't see this conflict as a one-sided thing, just feeling bad for the people of Ukraine, which I do. Feel very bad for the people of Ukraine. But we're not blaming Putin at all. Putin is doing what he thinks is right. Now, this is the perspective of the developing world, because there is a double standard here. When the war broke up in Iraq or Afghanistan, nobody said anything. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, nobody said anything. So why now? What's so different about this conflict? It's different because this conflict can bring the whole world into a third world war. That's the only difference. That's the perspective of developing world I'm sharing with you. Many people in this part of the world where I'm in don't see the conflict the way many Europeans and Americans see it at all. They're not blaming Putin at all. Putin is winning. I'm sorry, Paul. Fred, I'm sorry to disagree with you. I don't think Putin is losing this war at all. He is coming across as somebody that knows what he's doing. And he is Also, now if you follow the discussions yesterday at the Security Council, for example, Russia was accusing the United States of going into a biological war, and China was siding with Russia on this. Now, this is something that the world will listen to and hear very clearly. Just wanted to add this thing. I'm not siding with Putin at all. I'm not siding with the Russian invasion at all. I personally have my own doubts about the ability of Russia to win this thing. But I'm saying that this is a perspective that is shared by many people in the developing world. The world that has seen a lot of wars, lots of deaths. A child in Palestine, a child in Afghanistan, a child in Iraq is not less precious than a child in Ukraine. That's how the people here think. So that's what I just wanted to add. Thank you. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Dr. Talib. Professor David Wood, you have a very interesting view about this Ukraine war. So actually, from our audience, they want to know like how Russia is spreading the false information about the war in Ukraine. If you analyze this point, as well as if you give some views about information war, that will be helpful for our audience.
So Putin is a past master at lies and deception. I strongly urge everybody, if you haven't read it already, to see the masterful book, Putin's People, by Catherine Belton, who was a Financial Times correspondent in Russia for many years. She has interviewed an enormous number of people in Putin's past, in various Russian regimes. She has assembled a huge amount of references about Putin's misuse of information in his rise to power. When Russia invaded Ukraine the first time, 2014, Putin was insistent. It's nothing to do with Russia. Or there might be a few volunteers there, but there's no official sanction. It's not been organized by Russia. And eventually it became clear, of course, he had organized it. When the Russian commanders shot down the Malaysian airliner out of the sky, plummeting 200 people, more than 200 people to their deaths in eastern Ukraine. He told lie after lie after lie about that. Even more shocking is what he did to seize power in Russia, to invade the election, organizing false flag attacks on citizens in tower blocks in Russia, organizing things, blaming it on Chechen rebels. Horrendous, and lies and lies and lies. So he is a past master at the information war, and he probably did think he was winning that war. He looked at what he had managed to achieve in the West. He saw division, he saw doubt, he saw fear, things that he had managed to achieve by his resources, such as the St. Petersburg-based IRA, the Information Resource Agency. That may not be the exact name. He managed to make people doubt the values of NATO. NATO is, in my views, a profoundly good institution. NATO has brought unprecedented levels of peace to Europe, despite in the many hundred years before, Europe fighting again and again and again. Many countries in Eastern Europe begged. They wanted to be part of NATO. NATO was not imposed on them, but yet Putin thought he had managed to weave an alternative narrative which had caught many people's attention. And so as he initiated this invasion, he probably thought he was succeeding in setting the narrative around the world. He insisted, no, of course we're not going to invade. Of course we're just having exercises that happen to be all the way around Ukraine. And many people in the West echoed that. Many people in the developing world echoed that. There were people in political parties across all the European countries who echoed that line. But Putin overestimated his abilities. He was misled by his own people. The Russian economy, the Russian organization is badly dysfunctional. So many people have been siphoning off money. There has not been the appropriate checks and balances. He may be an autocrat, but he doesn't have the benefits of an open society helping the effective governance. So he was misled. And when he did launch his invasion, the West has unified. The rest of the world has unified in ways he did not expect. It's not just by the West, by the way, although there may be many individuals doubting throughout the developed world. Many of the countries in the developed world strongly voiced opposition in the United Nations General Assembly against what Putin had done. There's an unprecedented number of countries, including many from the developed world, who have brought the case to The Hague, saying Russia and Putin should be held responsible for war crimes. So there has been much more of a backlash than Putin expected. He misread his own strength. He thought he was stronger than he was. And the West's open sharing of information, led by remarkable information intelligence that somehow spread news beforehand that a massive invasion was pending, and people doubted it for a while. People said, oh, this is just the deep state in America spreading truths. When it did happen, people realized, no, there's more to it than that. So I think there has been a setback, but Putin has not given up. He is still spreading his lies, and he has managed to persuade some people to gullibly believe them. The lies about biological weaponry in Ukraine, there's no such truth to that, but people lap it up. Because why? Because they're afraid. Why do people believe terrible things? We should analyze the human circumstance. We often cannot bear to look at how terrible a circumstance is, and we therefore grab hold of something. The most terrible danger to the world is not posed by the nuclear weapons in this circumstance. It is posed by one individual, Vladimir Putin. I have no doubt in blaming him nearly 100% for this situation. Of course, the West has had mistakes, but these should not be held up in the same level. It's like saying Hitler had reasons to invade. The Treaty of Versailles had some unfortunate conditions in it. Yeah, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which finalized the First World War, did have many mistakes in it. Germans were asked to pay reparations. Hitler had some causes which he could manage to exacerbate. This did not mean that Hitler, therefore, should be viewed as just on the same level as the Allied powers. And it's exactly the same with Russia's invasion. So there's still an information war to be fought. We have to fight back against the fear that Putin is inducing. The message he is subtly trying to spread now is, you'd better back off me. I am a dangerous bear. Don't poke me, otherwise I will launch nuclear weapons and destroy the world. And it is causing at least some people to be afraid and saying, oh, maybe Mr. Putin's a bit of a nice man after all. Maybe we'd better talk to him. Okay, he's broken into Ukraine and bashing things up there. Let him hold on to the territory he has managed to rob and bully in this way. I say no. And I think Putin is going to lose that information war and that battle, though there is still a struggle ahead. If you want peace, we have to prepare for war. That's one of the oldest maxims. It goes back to the Roman Empire. It's not a very pleasant maxim, but we have to be clear-headed here rather than just naive. If we want peace, we have to prepare for war. What does that mean? It means we should be continuing to supply resources to the brave people throughout Ukraine who are resisting this aggression. And if we can do that, the outcome will be, we don't want Putin to continue. We want regime change. And Russians have had regime changes in the past. When Nikita Khrushchev overplayed his hand in the Cuban Missile Crisis, eventually he called back. But the Russian Kremlin people were very worried. And quite soon afterwards, there was a coup there. And his second-in-command, Leonid Brezhnev, took control. So Russians can organize changes in leadership. And our appeal should be not so much to Putin, I think he's beyond the pale, but to many men and women of good intelligence, good faith, good humanitarian instincts throughout Russia who can stop Putin. So we must hold out a promise of Russia doing well in the world if they can throw off this current regime, which has been leading them so badly astray.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Wood. Now I want to give chance to Professor David Smith, and we want to know one point specifically from our audience, even though many organizations, they love to know this point, role of NATO. Actually, do you believe, Professor David Smith, this NATO actually create real trust in this world? Even though if we observe Imran Khan's speech, there are something we are observing even Pakistan. They say that we cannot support NATO because they come to Pakistan, and we saw the Afghan war, and even 80,000 people we lost. We cannot get even thanks from NATO. Do you believe this NATO, because this crisis is happening because of NATO? Because
Sharif?
Ukraine want to, yeah.
Sharif, Mr. Joyle has a time constraint. Would it be possible to let him speak next?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Professor.
David, if you can patient, thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you very much. I want to focus very clearly on the informational character of the war going on. That's today's topic. It's not some of the other things that we've discussed. Let's focus on that. So I'm going to start with a definition from a 1972 top secret KGB dictionary that defined disinformation data as is especially prepared data used for the creation in the mind of the enemy of incorrect or imaginary pictures of reality on the basis of which the enemy would make decisions beneficial to the Soviet Union. So let's agree on the definition first, that the attempt of information warfare is to operate as part of a reflexive control operation to affect minds and decision makings of the opponent. Now let's look at the propaganda summary that we've seen so far. After 3 weeks of unexpected resistance in Ukraine, Russia's propaganda system has struggled to recapture the advantage in the information space. Russian narratives tailored for multiple audiences attempt to justify the conflict, create doubt in Ukrainian narratives, and claim resiliency in face of Western sanctions. This is a special military operation. It's not a war, and we're engaged in denazification. So there are 4 audiences that they're directing their messaging to. The first is towards Russia in the Russian language. First, it claims that Russian war crimes is fake news in Ukrainian news and press. Second, the military operation is proceeding normally and on schedule. Third, the West has declared economic war on Russia. And fourth, Biden decided to stop the war, not Russia. So those are and we are attempting finally to eradicate Nazism in Ukraine, which is a threat to Russia itself. Now, let's look at the Russian messaging to the Ukraine. Ukraine is disillusioned with NATO. Secondly, Western media is questioning the presence of biolabs. Third, Russia is providing humanitarian aid to liberated regions. And lastly, Zelensky realized it was necessary to negotiate with Russia, not NATO. In terms of the biolabs, I could go on for a long time about the disinformation there. It goes back to 1985 when Fort Detrick was identified in the most successful Soviet disinformation plan that it created the AIDS virus. Now, anyways, this is pure disinformation. There's nothing about this that stands true. Let's go to now the message to the Russian diaspora around the world. The Russian goal is to protect the Donbass. Secondly, Western sanctions will not hurt the Russian economy. Third, Ukraine has divided the West. And fourth, the Kremlin announced Russia will not default on its debts. Lastly, the message to the Western audiences. Ukraine officials are lying about the conflict. Neutral Ukraine is a good idea for the West. Western sanctions will hurt Western markets, and European consumer prices climb to the highest rate in history. So despite new laws and strong statements from the Russian president, he's seeking to suppress any anti-war activism. Activists have been able to organize. There has been small but significant cohort of celebrities and influencers challenging the Kremlin's line. Is this enough to disrupt the domestic propaganda system of the Kremlin? I doubt it right now. The most interesting challenge to the regime came from retired Colonel General Ivashov, who released a statement on the 31st of January calling for no invasion, calling that this is a mercenary action, it's criminal, it will lead Russia to be a pariah of the world, it will not work, and that Putin is incompetent and corrupt. Colonel General Ivashov is the head of the Retired Officers Association. All his predictions have come true.
Thank you. We may have lost Sharif.
Yeah. Paul, is that what you wanted to say?
Yeah, that's, I mean, I don't want to monopolize more of the time. Right. I think I've covered the points.
Then,
how do you assess these messages as going across? And you've highlighted very thoroughly what the messages are. How well do you think these messages are being received by the intended audiences, or do the audiences see through these messages and increasingly distrust their source?
It's a very simple equation here. That number one, it's working inside of Russia, but that is there's erosion going on. Secondly, it's not working in the West. Thirdly, it is having some effect in the diaspora. And then fourth, I think that, you know, the information space, the global information space is they have not been successful. However, they are successful to a certain degree in Africa and the unaligned world. They have great a repertoire of front organizations, agents of influence who are pushing out a lot of false narratives, whether it be on biological centers, etc. I myself was involved with the Department of Defense in establishing the Lugar Center in Tbilisi, Georgia, for a $100 million investment. That is now the CDC of Georgia, and it was the only facility in the former Soviet space that was able to do COVID tests for its population during the pandemic. The BBC had a tremendous program to show that the propaganda coming out of Igor Georgadze, the former Minister of State Security of Georgia, who fled to Moscow, who tried to kill Shevardnadze, had this elaborate program in which he tried to say that this was a bioweapons lab and 2 floors were sealed off from the Georgians. The BBC went there, showed that this was absolutely false. And by the way, that operation on the Lugar Center was done to distract after Skripal was infected with the Novichok. So they skillfully used distractions to take the attention away from crimes being committed in order to say, you see these Americans, they're doing X, Y, and Z. This is the nature of the propaganda war, the disinformation war that they are so skilled at.
Thank you, Professor Paul, for your excellent analysis for today's topic. Professor David Smith, this is very important for our audience about this role of NATO.
Well, sure. Thank you so much. Let me just preface and get into it a little bit. Propaganda really began to move into its current form about the time of the Vietnamese War, as you begin to see global communications come in place. Propaganda before that was dropping leaflets on a battlefield behind lines and what you could do to influence press days later. So this is one of the big changes that you've seen. And I'm going to talk at the end of this about what is really different today and what has changed in this whole disinformation game. But let me say a couple of things. Part of what Dr. Flip has said and part of what I've said, there's truth on both sides of this. The game today is with any conflict, you're going to have disinformation campaigns. You're going to have outright propaganda campaigns. Cyber is going to be part of any conflict today. And the world has changed with that, and in some good ways and some very bad ways. Um, so if you look at Russia, yes, Russia's using disinformation campaigns. If you look at the West, at Ukraine and others, they're using different disinformation campaigns too. Uh, and both sides are there. Was there a biolab in Russia? I mean, in Ukraine? Yes, there was one. The U.S. funded it to build it, but it was looking at proteins and that side. It was not a weapons grade biolab. On the other hand, Ukraine used to be part of the former Soviet Union. And yes, you under the Soviet Union, all the different countries had different specialties. One of Ukraine's specialty was advanced science. Their developers are some of the best that I use remotely. As I've said before, I have two development teams in Ukraine. One of them has lost one of the developers who was killed by the Russians so far. And I still talk to them every week. And so I have a inside view coming out of Ukraine. I've had people here in Austin who had family members in there, and one of them recently had, with the help of Ukraine intelligence and U.S., they went in a rescue mission and pulled two of them out of Kiev and brought them out. So this is not just a one looking at the news. I also, because of the work I have done in the intelligence community and in DoD, I still have a lot of deep contacts and I still have active security clearance. So I'm hearing different stories on part of it. So again, the premise is both sides are in a disinformation battle. That's part of war.
Good.
That's part of conflict. And where are we with that? I agree with
We're losing
what
you.
has been said by others, is that um, Russia dramatically underestimated the response that was happening. And Russia also underestimated how porous
I think we
its
lost you,
borders
David.
have become with the new digitalization age. You know, for example, they launched cyber attacks to neutralize the internet in Ukraine. Well, that hasn't happened. The network has become resilient enough. Folks like Elon Musk from here in Austin has flown terminals in. And even though Russia is now jamming
David,
Starlink on the ground,
can you hear
and they have a
us?
very active jamming program going,
David,
it's still going through. And you see that. Um, where the big difference is today, and uh, what the strategy has to be, is this is the first conflict where you've had so many smart cameras, smart cell phones connected to the internet. And that is one of the big differences here. You've also had the same thing in Russia. You know, the state television there has shown the staged rally on Putin that says what he's doing right. But then you've seen citizen cameras beaming out of the country, video of protests going the other way too. You know, as David said, you and Paul said, you've got leaders of the Russian government in the past and others beginning to denounce this. And in 20 years ago, that would not have happened. You would not have seen those images from Russia. The other thing that has happened is using the same thing. We've seen up close and personal in Ukraine the impacts. You know, in a broadcast out of Russia yesterday, Putin denied hitting civilian targets. But, you can geolocate where the rockets are hitting, and they are fixed targets. And, if you go back and look at the elements in there, that is some of the places where you see the restrictions being very strong, is that there's a violation of him hitting fixed targets. And by his special military operation. I think I love part of his approach with that calling it a special military operation. He might believe that's part of his disinformation campaign too. The other thing is the world has misjudged totally on this conflict how industry would react. You know, to see the number of countries shut down their operations in Russia, the number of countries who've turned and provided aid to Ukraine. If you had asked me to do a scenario on this, that would not have been in any of my scenarios to do, and as a futurist. Would there be reaction? Yes. But, you know, Putin has said sanctions won't work. Well, sanctions are beginning to have an impact at some level. Even his strong relationship with China is weakening because Xi has now come back and said the barbariness about this attack really surprises them. And I know there's a lot of back channel communications going to other countries out of China because China understands that a large part of their economy is controlled by folks outside of Russia. If you look at some of the statistics, Russia represents less than 2% of China's gross domestic product of their goods sold and things. So that is not the real determining factor like it might have been in the past because of how global China has become. You know, is Russia spreading blatantly false information on the war, like in the questions? Yes. Is Ukraine? Yes. Are other nations? Yes. That is called the fog of war. And you want to understand that the only way to understand it is to have ground truth. And ground truth is an intelligence term, really. And part of the ground truth on this is seeing, again, from the people who are not part of the government, who are not part of the military, with what we're seeing from their cameras, what we're seeing from their geolocation devices, what are we seeing from those other elements. That is, like I said, the big difference in this information warfare today. Information warfare, by definition, like what Paul read, has a unique place in military doctrine. And this conflict is helping rewrite military doctrine as we speak. I can tell you, I know a number of working groups who are already studying this as a way to recast how we're doing things. And it's losing the information war for Russia, I think, is a very interesting point. You know, they could lose the information war and win the war. And that's very possible here. You know, it's a country that's actually the size of France that they're attacking. You know, you've had more than 4 million children and mothers leave the country. You know, there's an estimated 15 million babies still in Ukraine. You can see part of that as you're going with it. The Ukraine was one of the prime producers of wheat. There's going to be a wheat shortage globally coming up because of that and climate change around the world. So we're all losing part of this war because of the war. And it's important to consider that. The other question is, what strategy helps Ukraine to protect itself? Is Ukraine has done
We have 15 minutes left.
A masterful job of pulling together world opinion. That is the best thing that Ukraine can do to protect itself. You're not going to see armies enter it from other nations. That has been made clear. But the inflow of help, and particularly the inflow of information, particularly classified information, is really helping Ukraine set itself in place. So again, too much there, but it's really on both sides, but it is part of war. And Putin underestimated and is losing that part of the information war.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. I believe Professor Lian, she has a presentation. So,
Yeah.
yes, I already gave this presentation, so I'm sharing with you.
You have to
Yeah.
unmute yourself, Lynn. Lian, you have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
There we go. So I thought this, I've been following this, as I had mentioned, as everyone else has been very closely, and this whole business of information warfare is quite fascinating, especially in the world of younger people, the use of tools like Twitter and TikTok and so on and so forth. So there was a gentleman by the name of Carl Miller who started to follow some of these tweets that were going on, and I thought this was fascinating. What they found is that um, they did a bunch of semantic modeling, and he continues to do that. You can find him on Twitter. What he found was it was very clear that Russia was targeting BRICS, Africa, and Asia, and not really targeting the West at all because they knew they couldn't really control the messaging in the West. What's fascinating, what's interesting about this slide, and I won't go into all the details, but the clusters are distinct from each other in many ways other than language. So then you see the bright pink and red areas and green and beige clusters send way more tweets than others. The average is about 4 to 1, where the orange is about a 0.5. So what they discovered was this was probably Russian troll farms sending out these messages and retweeting and sending out repeats of their own information. In the blue area, which was different than any other cluster, the English language and very was very pronounced, and it was mostly new accounts that were in the blue cluster. And there was about 5 million messages, but almost no followers. So another Russian troll disinformation, campaign. Another area that they were focusing on was people who were speaking languages of Urdu, Japanese, Nepali, and Malaysian. Every tweet averages 3.4 million three and a half thousand messages. Again, very few followers. Another way that Russia was conducting their campaign. What was really fascinating in the yellow area is that it was focused on South Africa, pro-Zuma, and then also BRICS solidarity messaging. There was really, these they thought were real accounts in the yellow area, but was overall, the numbers of tweets expanded extremely on March 2nd. And that was when Russia probably realized that they were really losing the information war pretty badly. There's other areas too, the Hindu in the pink, and then Indian accounts too. But again, there's only 18 followers. So again, Russian troll farming. And then some of the other clusters show large numbers as well and older accounts. But most of those were targeted towards Nigerian fuel shortages based on the challenges that we face with the oil. So I just wanted to say that people are actually studying this, as David said. It's really fascinating to watch the numbers and to see how the Russian troll farms are reaching out. And what's happening with these Russian troll farms, you'll see on the news then where South Africa has come out and supported Russia, or India won't pick a side, or China is hemming and hawing. The BRICS countries are kind of trying to stay in the middle, and they really are not able to do that. Some of it's based on their past relationships, which is a whole nother conversation. But some of this tweeting is actually working for them in disinformation campaigns. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Professor Lian.
Thank you.
Professor Paul, you bring very important strategy. I just want to take this question for you that what strategy helped Ukraine to protect Israel, and do you believe it can be possible? That if you can give us a better strategy, how Ukraine can protect themselves from this war?
Mm.
Professor Paul.
I'm sorry?
Yes, the
You're
questions
asking?
actually come from audience. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. How can
Yes,
Ukraine protect itself?
yes.
Yes.
Well, are you talking militarily or information warfare?
Information were already, I think you explained that military and good strategy, how we can support and help this Ukraine
Well, the
people.
most important thing is what I've been pushing for some time. It's just started: loitering munitions, Switchblade 300s, anti-personnel kamikaze drones, and 600 anti-armor. That extends the hunter killer team's battlefield effectiveness to beyond 1 mile, and in terms of the 600 switchblades, more than 5 miles. Right now, the discussion on the MiGs is just a waste of time. That's just will be debris on the battlefield. Getting surface to air missile systems, Books, 300s, 200s, etc., very important. I think the most important thing is for the UN to declare a humanitarian safe zone. And that needs to be put in all areas of Ukraine which do not contain Russian troops. That's where you can have an effective air zone, free air zone, and that would protect the Polish border, and especially Lviv, which is a UNESCO city of heritage, which must be protected. It was not even bombed by Hitler. So this is very important to keeping the supply lines going, keeping refugees being able to move safely rather than ducking cover their way to the border. And then the information warfare ace in the hole is Zelensky himself. I mean, this man, it's interesting that a comedian has now turned into a world leader. Uh, Situations create leaders. Leaders are not created; they're chosen. He's the chosen one, and he has stepped up, and he is leading the fight. And the morale of his troops are tremendous. I'm in contact with the general staff and others on a daily basis. I get the updates each day of what's happening from a disinformation campaign, etc. I fear that the so-called 11 biolabs in the Ukraine will be used in a false flag operation to conduct a chemical weapon attack. This is what we must, and that includes the city of Lviv.
Yeah.
The desperation of the Russian forces is absolutely incredible. A combat brigade has 3 battalions, 2 of which are conscripts. They're not fighting or running or knowing what to do. The failure of the hierarchy, the reason why you're losing so many generals, is that junior officers cannot take any initiative on the battlefield. They have to get their direction from higher ups. It's like the Soviet Army. And I will recall what Marshal Zhukov said during World War II, because Russia is an artillery army with a lot of tanks. That's who they are. And Zhukov said, when you encounter resistance, increase the force. And that is what they're doing now in targeting civilian populations. This is not only a war crime, it is a crime against humanity. And anyone says that there are 2 sides to this conflict are ignoring the brute fact that, 1, international law has been violated, a country has been breached, and secondly, there's a war against the civilians. There's no debate on this. You can talk about NATO, this, and bio war. Listen, it's brute facts. What you do in combat, that you will be judged. And this is intolerable.
Thank
Paul,
you.
just
Thank
to
you,
pick
Professor.
that up a little bit more, you talked about creating these humanitarian spaces sanctioned by the UN. Is the UN going to be able to cooperate to get such a thing agreed, given Russia's veto on the Security Council? And what's going to keep these spaces safe in practice, given that the Russians, again, may be inclined to ignore anything that's said?
You have to go through the General Assembly, number one. And if Russia and its minions want to object to that, let their names go on the list that humanity will remember. And then that's part of our information warfare game. Secondly, who's going to do the enforcement? That's a trickier question. I think NATO has to step up and say, we'll take care of that.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, you are actually Secretary General for UN
Thank you.
WTO. So,
Thank you.
what is your advice? How UN can help for this Ukraine people?
The UN cannot help, unfortunately. The UN is part of the multilateral system. That's all of doubt now. The multilateral system has failed us in so many ways. It's failed us in COVID, it's failed us in the Ukraine war as well. Because the UN system is part of the past. It's part of the heritage of the past. So the UN cannot help us, unfortunately. I respect what Professor Paul is saying. Paul is concentrating on the issue of information warfare. And that's very, very important. Now, who's winning that war? The person that's winning that war is the person that can address more people. I think what Professor Lane has presented us is very, very important, because different clients are receiving this information from different sources in different cultural backgrounds. As I said again, in the Middle East here, for example, you can't really talk about Ukraine alone without mentioning Iraq, without mentioning Syria, without mentioning Afghanistan. It doesn't work that way. So the recipient audience here is different, Paul. I'm sorry to say this. Now, I am very sympathetic with the call of the Ukrainian, many friends in Ukraine, and I feel bad for them. But I also understand the fact that this is not a fair war game. It's not fair at all. It's not fair for the Ukrainians, it's not fair for the Russians that are fighting this war. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Fred Philip, I have to go for the concluding remarks for today's sessions because we have many speakers. I want to give chance everyone. What is your concluding remarks for today?
Well, looking at the comments, Ms. Shams, Ms. Ahmed, I hope that I expect that the discussion has answered your questions. Mr. Mahmoud, perhaps only partially answered yours. Yours is a very difficult question about how Ukraine can protect itself. Perhaps one avenue that hasn't been mentioned is that, successive video appearances of Mr. Putin, he looks increasingly beleaguered and haggard and generally put upon and less coherent. And the idea that that others in the Russian hierarchy might replace him, I can't say for sure. Others on the panel would know more than me, but this would be one avenue to ending the conflict. Now, the village where my maternal grandmother's people came from was sometimes in Ukraine, sometimes in Poland, and I think sometimes in Moldova. And if you have a whimsical mind like mine, it brings up a visual image of...
What's the name of that village, Fred? Paul, what's the name of that village?
It has a very long name. I can find out for you later. But
Thank you.
It raises a comical image of people loading the whole shtetl onto wheelbarrows, buildings and all, and running across the border, probably shortly in advance of a coming pogrom. But the point of this story is not for me to be a comedian, but to say that here in the West we believe in national borders, but a lot of the national borders were arbitrarily drawn by Western European colonizers. Other parts of the world, particularly Russia and China, they believe in spheres of influence more than they believe in national borders. And this is a cultural difference that underlies some of what we've been talking about today. Now, I completely sympathize with what Professor Talib was saying about attention to other conflicts in other parts of the world. Why are we getting so much press attention and such a high level of emotion about Russia and Ukraine? And I believe the answer is that, since the end of World War II, it's been the primary goal of the United States and its allies to maintain peace in Europe. It has, for better or worse, it has not been the primary goal of U.S. foreign policy to maintain peace in Mali, for example, just to pull an example. So what's the answer to this? Of course, there are tragedies going on now in Mali and in Syria and Iraq. The answer to this is not to put less press attention on Ukraine. The answer is to put more and equal press attention to the tragedies in Syria and elsewhere. Okay, I think that's my wrap up. David Smith, I'll be driving to Austin tomorrow. Hopefully see you in later this week sometime.
Thank you, Professor Fred Philip. Professor Lian, what's your concluding remarks for today?
I just want to first of all say thank you for the invitation to be a participant in this important discussion. I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know. We can read a lot of information. We can read tweets and emails and Facebook and watch the news, but what's really going on behind the scenes, we don't know what we don't know, as Secretary Rumsfeld used to say. So I just think that we need to keep paying attention. When you see something, ask the question, what's the source of this information? What's the truth source of this information? And just keep your mind open to the future. I'm hopeful for Ukraine, and we'll see what happens over the next few weeks.
Thank you. Professor David Wood, what's your concluding remarks?
So after the terrible tragedy of the Second World War, the world did manage to make some improvements in how it addressed global issues. The United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and very importantly, the Marshall Plan initiative in which Americans rebuilt much of Western Europe and also independently rebuilt Japan. I have hopes that as a result of the terrible tragedy, the unprecedented in the 21st century tragedy in Ukraine, we are going to redouble our efforts to pool together and avoid repetitions in the past. The United Nations may not be the vehicle to do that, as Talib pointed out. There are problems with it. I envision a role for what was the G7. It expanded to the D10. 10 democratic countries. I think that should grow a lot larger, and countries which meet various criterion in terms of real democracy and not the sham kind of democracy that's been practiced recently in Russia should be admitted to it. And it's not just a matter of addressing the situation in Ukraine. It's entirely right. We have to draw our attention to what's going on in Yemen, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Palestine and other places too. We should need to do that with a renewed vigor, because if we let these terrible incidents fester, all kinds of problems will be generated as a result. The final thing I would offer is, in terms of a resolution to this, in the peace talks that are going on, we must insist on self-determination for the people in the Donbass region and in Crimea. We cannot repeat what happened at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 or the Versailles Treaty of 1919, or even the Munich so-called peace agreement of 1938, in which the fates of people were determined by people sitting around a conference table far away. So we should not just say, oh, you people in the Donbass area, you will be allocated to the Russian sphere of influence after that. No, it should be their decision. And that should be a key part of the peace negotiations as well. Not that these regions will be made independent of Ukraine, but that people there will have a free and fair choice with independent monitoring by some external independent trusted source to view how that's taking place. But thanks for organizing this, Sharif. We all care about peace, but we need to be wise as to how we achieve it.
Thank you, Professor David Wood. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, Sharif, I will stay brief here. To me, like I said earlier, the big thing that has changed in the disinformation campaign of this is that you see all these citizens with smart cameras and smartphones, which are geolocated, and that they don't have the picture capabilities to put out really sophisticated propaganda. Propaganda will be happening on all sides. And even the misinformation around things like biolabs and things, different parts of the governments have different answers, as we saw about the biolab in Ukraine. The president said it wasn't there. The Secretary of State said it was there. And Obama said it was there. So you've got this even internal disinformation and flow. The big thing you have to do with this is you need to take your emotion out of what you're looking at. You need to verify the sources. You want to see the information from several different sources. And that will help minimize part of the disinformation. It's the same thing as if this was a political campaign or economic approach or things too. With the global digital network, with communications being real time, that's going to happen. I mean, while we were talking, I got a notice of a commercial airliner crash in China that killed 133 people. Could I have gotten that update a few years ago? No. So even something like that shows that our information sphere has changed. And the information sphere is what's important when you're judging a war or a big conflict of types, is you have to understand whose side it's on, what the other side's saying. They're going to be different, and check the facts to make sure that you understand it. You cannot assume that any information source is 100% accurate, because the likelihood during the fog of war is that it is not. But that, we have the sources now to go and look at multiple locations of data. And I agree with Ms. Trelane that we have to look at the other conflicts as well. I mean, we see the conflicts between Pakistan and India. We're seeing the other ones in the Middle East. We're seeing North Korea and South Korea. And we saw that North Korea has taken opportunities of this to go other places. We've seen Taiwan and China be impacted by this disinformation campaign as well. So it is a global phenomenon, but we need to take the steps to understand what is right, what is true, and take our emotion out of it. So Sri, thank you so much for letting me be part of this.
Thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Fred Philip, Professor Lian, Professor David Wood, and Professor Dr. Talib Raphael for joining today's important discussions. One thing I can say as a moderator, today's discussion is very, very valuable for our audience because they can learn a lot more things, how actually information were happening, what is the role of UN, what is the role of Ukraine, and how does it work. But as a freedom fighter song, because my father was a freedom fighter, he died in 2017. I can say, because I'm from a very small country, it's in Bangladesh. In 1971, my fathers, my uncle, my grandfathers, everyone actually victim of this war. And from my childhood, I learned a lot about war and protection and guerrilla war. what will happen? Example, even though in between few weeks, what our speaker actually assumed, even Russia win this war, then guerrilla war start. What happened? What I see from my family in 1971, then government will form to the outside of the country, and they will support this guerrilla. Maybe after 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, maybe 7 years, who will win? People will win. Ukraine definitely gonna win this war. Even few weeks ago, I said from my experience, because when people affected, when there is a untruth, where is a all of the wrong things happening, definitely people gonna win, and Ukraine people definitely gonna win this war. That is our belief, and we believe this information war actually Putin cannot win, because I just want to share one of the interesting things. Uh, uh, even what is going on in the social media, even it's a part of information where like someone arranging this campaign, send Putin to Jupiter, Donald, to help us to build a rocket that will send a bloody dictator far far away. I'm sorry, maybe it's a different views, but that is the reality. This is the reality. This is the mindset of the youth. This is the mindset of the people. They do not want war. Nobody want war around the world. Even in social media, nobody want war. Everybody want peace. Everybody want protections. So any big countries, please try to understand. Like one times you have to go for retirement. You will die. Even Putin has to understand. So, but history is very important. What you did for this world, this is important. For the global peace, I request Mr. Putin, please stop this war. People gonna support the Ukraine people, even though the big countries, especially the developed world, we request from the developing world, please support all of the peaceful initiative. Last few years we are observing actually developed world, they are investing lot of money for arms business and these developments, and many countries from Middle East and other countries, they are buying these arms. We should stop this. We should invest in maybe healthcare, in educations, maybe other important thing, maybe water purification, maybe food and safety. So that is the way we can go for global peace. That's why World Talent Economy Forum, Transhumanist Party, Tando, all of us actually collaborate together, because we want global peace. We want some good work for the developing nations, and definitely we can support developed nations as well. This is the way we can develop better world. So this war, maybe practically Putin gonna win, but it's my trust, from core of my heart, Putin never gonna win this war. He has to lost this war. Otherwise, this history will be difficult for us. So definitely, world talent economy for people. Everybody discuss about technology and investment. We always focus on people. We want to save human lives. And thank you, Professor Fred Philip, for your excellent initiative. Professor Lian, Professor David Wood, Professor David Smith, Dr. Talib Raphael for supporting World Talent Economy Forum. And we want to support Ukraine people. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.